Gearheads, let's dive into the top 10 muscle cars you should never buy. Kicking off our list at number 10 is the Ford Mustang II. Now, I know what you're going to say. It's a Mustang. How bad could it be? But just hold on a second. This wasn't your classic tire-shredding muscle car Mustang. This was different. You see, after the oil crisis hit, everyone was scrambling for fuel efficiency, even Ford. So they took the Mustang, a symbol of American muscle, and they shrunk it. A lot. Sure, they crammed a V8 in there, but it was wheezing out a sad 142 horsepower. I mean, come on, that's barely enough to get out of its own way. 0 to 60 in 10.5 seconds? Some folks will try to defend it, saying it was a product of its time and that Ford was just responding to market pressures. But I'm not buying it. So if you're looking for that raw, untamed Mustang power, steer clear of the Mustang II. You'll be sorely disappointed. Next up on the list is Pontiac GTO at number 9. The GTO in its prime was a legend, a true muscle car icon, but by 1974, oh boy, things had taken a serious turn. This wasn't the GTO that roared onto the scene back in the 60s. This was, it was a different beast altogether. They'd slapped a 350 cubic inch V8 under the hood, but it was only cranking out a measly 200 horsepower. Seriously? That's barely enough to chirp the tires. It felt more like you were driving your grandma's Sunday Cruiser than a fire-breathing muscle car. And the biggest insult? It was sharing its platform with the Chevy Nova. The Nova! Talk about a downgrade. It's like putting a champion boxer in a pillow fight. Some folks might try to defend it, saying it was still a GTO in spirit. But let's be real, the spirit was barely flickering. If you're chasing that classic GTO thrill, the 1974 model is one you'll definitely want to skip. Now let's move on to another fallen icon. We have the 1976 Dodge Charger at number 8. This one's a real heartbreaker for muscle car fans. The Charger's a name synonymous with raw power and aggressive style. Think about it, this was supposed to be a Charger, a car that once dominated the streets with its roaring engines and imposing presence. But thanks to those pesky fuel economy regulations and shifting consumer tastes, it had been seriously tamed. The top-of-the-line model, with its supposedly impressive 6.6-liter engine, was only churning out 185 horsepower. 185 for a Charger! That's just sad. And it wasn't just the lack of power. This thing was heavy, weighing in at over 4,250 pounds. Combine that with the underwhelming horsepower, and you get a 0 to 60 time of around 11 seconds. 11 seconds! That's not acceleration, that's a leisurely stroll. I bet you're going to want to steer clear of the 76 model. It simply doesn't live up to the legendary name. At number 7, we have a real forgotten footnote in muscle car history, the 1972 Mercury Montego. Now, on paper, this car had some potential. It had a V8 engine, which in the muscle car world is usually a good starting point. But in Montego's case, it just didn't deliver. It was only pushing out 208 horsepower. You believe that? That's hardly earth-shattering. It didn't handle well, it wasn't particularly quick, and to make matters worse, it was plagued with reliability issues. It's no wonder the Montego has been largely forgotten by muscle car enthusiasts. It just didn't live up to the hype. If you're looking for a thrilling muscle car experience, something that gets your heart pumping and puts a smile on your face, the 1972 Mercury Montego is definitely one you should avoid. There are far better options out there that live up to the muscle car name. Here's an ugly truth about muscle car fans often ignore. Many beloved classics weren't actually that fast compared to modern cars. Their quarter-mile focus emphasized raw, often inefficient power over overall performance. Primitive tires, rudimentary suspension, and displacement-heavy engines meant that these so-called legends often had underwhelming 0 to 60 times and would be easily outmatched by modern cars. Yet the myth persists, fueled by nostalgia and a focus on the experience and rebellious image, rather than actual performance numbers. Now coming in at number 6 is the 1982 Pontiac Firebird. Now, the Firebird, like the GTO, had a reputation. It was supposed to be a fiery, exciting machine. But by 1982, things had gone wrong. Pontiac, it seems, was trying to pull a fast one, cashing in on the Firebird name without actually putting in the work, and this particular model is a perfect example of that. Basically, what they did was take a Chevrolet Camaro, slapped a different badge on it, and called it a Firebird. Isn't that just lazy? It's like putting a different costume on the same actor and expecting everyone to believe it's a completely different character. Sure, there were some minor cosmetic tweaks, but underneath it was the same car. And that car, unfortunately, was underwhelming. We're talking about base models with a measly 90 horsepower from a 4-cylinder engine. Even the top engine option, the 305 cubic inch V8, was only pushing out around 165 horsepower. Let's put that into perspective. 165 horsepower in a car that was supposed to be a performance machine. So if you're looking for a Firebird that lives up to the name, the 82 model is one you'll want to skip. It's a prime example of style over substance and a real disappointment for fans of the brand. Alright, we're halfway through our list, and now we're hitting a real sore spot for some. At number 5, we have the 1972 Mercury Cougar. Now the Cougar started out strong, right? It was supposed to be the sophisticated, stylish cousin of the Mustang, a bit more refined but still packing a punch. But by 1972 model, oh boy, things had gone downhill fast. We're talking about a V8 engine that was struggling to produce 266 horsepower. 266 in a supposed muscle car. That's just sad. Buyers were left with a car that barely scraped past mediocrity. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't thrilling, it was just there. So if you're actually seeking those muscle car thrills, the kind that makes your heart race and your tires squeal, you're going to want to steer clear of the 72 Cougar. It's a prime example of how even a promising nameplate can fall from grace. Now we're down to number 4, and this one's a real pain. The 1981 Mercury Capri RS Turbo. Now, just hearing turbo attached to a car name gets your hopes up, right? You imagine blistering acceleration, a rush of power, the whole 9 yards. But with this Capri, don't be fooled. It's a classic case of all bark and no bite. While it sounds exciting on paper, this model struggled to deliver any real-world performance. We're talking about 180 horsepower. That's just disappointing. And that lack of power translated directly into its acceleration. Instead of thrilling sprints, you got more of a leisurely stroll. 0 to 60 in 8.6 seconds? Seriously? That's not muscle car territory, that's family sedan territory. When it comes to true muscle cars, you'd expect snapping acceleration, the kind that pins you to your seat. This Capri just didn't cut it. And now, taking the bronze medal for muscle car letdowns, we have the 1980 Pontiac Grand Prix. This car, my friends, is a prime example of everything that went wrong during the dark days of the late 70s and early 80s for muscle cars. It perfectly describes the era of shrinking engines and plummeting power outputs, all in the name of fuel economy. Now, I understand the need for efficiency, but sacrificing performance to this degree, that's just a tragedy. The Grand Prix, a car that once roared with power and presence, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. We're talking about 125 horsepower coming from its smaller V8 engine. 125 in a Grand Prix! That's just insulting. We're talking about a snail's pace of around 14 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. You could probably walk faster than that. This Grand Prix is a far cry from the powerhouse it once was. It's certainly not worth your investment if you're looking for a true muscle car experience. It's a sad reminder of a time when muscle cars lost their way. Runner-up on our list is the Chevrolet Citation X11 produced between 1980 and 1985. This car's a real pain in the heart. The Citation X11 suffered from a serious identity crisis. It was trying to be both a compact car and a muscle car at the same time, and it failed miserably at both. It didn't have the fuel efficiency of a true compact, and it certainly didn't have the power or the style of a true muscle car. It was stuck in this awkward middle ground, pleasing no one. The performance metrics were underwhelming, to say the least. It just didn't have the energy that enthusiasts craved. So if you're looking for a car that delivers on the promise of speed, style, and classic muscle car feel, the Citation X11 is definitely one you should avoid. It's a prime example of a car that tried to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to no one. And finally, taking the crown, or rather the tarnished trophy, for the worst muscle car you should never, ever buy is the infamous Ford Pinto. Now, I know what you're thinking. The Pinto? A muscle car? And you'd be right to question that. It wasn't exactly designed as one, but incredibly, some marketing folks actually tried to push it as a sporty muscle car icon during its production run. What were they thinking? Seriously, this car is a disaster on wheels. Even at its best, the Pinto's engines were only churning out around 100 horsepower. That's barely enough to power a decent lawnmower, let alone a car that's supposed to evoke any sense of performance. But the real kicker, the thing that cements the Pinto's place at the bottom of this list, is purely because of its pathetic safety records. We all know the stories, the rear-end collisions, the exploding gas tanks. It's a horror show. Buying one would be like actively inviting trouble into your garage and potentially putting yourself at serious risk. If you value your life and your sanity, stay far, far away from the Ford Pinto. It's not just a bad muscle car, it's a bad car, period. So there you have it, gearheads. Top 10 muscle cars you should never buy if you're serious about performance and reliability. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe to our channel and make sure to check out our previous video where we discuss the 5 cheapest muscle cars for less than $10K. See you in the next one.